Welcome. Over the last 3 years of these talks, we've looked at Psalms for every possible occasion, except I don't remember doing a psalm for before a battle. David, as the king of Israel, was also the leader of its army, and he fought many battles to free Israel from the enemies on every side of it who were oppressing Israel at the time when he became king. Yet David was a good and holy man, a man who prayed much, who depended upon God. And so it shouldn't surprise us if David, before leading Israel's men into battle, prayed. But how did he pray? And how did the people pray for him before that battle? Today we're going to be looking at Psalm 20. My name is Keith Simons. I'm a Bible teacher from England. I present these talks on how to understand the King James Bible using the book of Psalms. Each time we look at a section of the book of Psalms, verse by verse and word by word, seeking to understand its meaning. And today, as I say, we're looking at Psalm 20. So imagine it, the day before the battle. People are nervous. Lives will be lost in that battle. And David, with the responsibility for the men who are going into war, turns to prayer. He offers a sacrifice to God, or rather, he presents an animal to the priests who offer that animal as a sacrifice by fire to God on the altar, an act of devotion to show that David and Israel's men are devoting themselves to God in this battle, not to fight for revenge or for profit or for cruelty. But no, they're devoting themselves to God to do God's work in freeing his people from the oppression of enemies. And in this setting, Psalm 20, today's psalm, would be prayed. It's heading to the chief musician, a psalm of David. So we think David wrote this psalm, but it's very much a psalm about David, and it was for the attention of the chief musician, the leader of the worship of God, to lead the people in prayer for David as he carried out this great task and led the army into battle. And when we look at it, much of the psalm is spoken as if it's to David, as if David is being blessed by these words. It's also a prayer for David. It's a blessing and a prayer. It's asking God to help him. So, verse 1, the Lord hear thee in the day of trouble. The name of the God of Jacob defend thee. Thee, of course, means the same as you in modern English. Singular. It is the word you use when you're speaking to just one person. And David is asking his soldiers, the priests, the Levites, to pray for him and to pray that the Lord will hear David in the day of trouble. When is the day of trouble? The day of the battle. They're asking that God will hear David's prayers. That's what David needs more than anything else. He could pray for victory in this battle. He could pray for great successes. But above all, he needs that God is hearing him and supporting him in this situation. The second request at the end of verse 1, the name of the God of Jacob defend thee. Jacob, the man from whose family Israel came. His God is David's God too. And the God who looked after Jacob in all his troubles and in all his difficulties is the God who is looking after David as David leads these men out into the field of battle. The name of God, God's character, God's perfect character, the God of love and of mercy and of kindness, the God who forgives sins, will be David's defender on the day of battle. Verse 2. Where does this help come from? Send thee help from the sanctuary and strengthen thee out of Zion. The sanctuary, it means the holy place. And Zion, where in later days a temple, God's house, would be built. It's a hill in Jerusalem. And the people are praying that God will send David help from his holy place, from Zion, from the place where Israel's relationship with God is secured physically. That God will send David help and strength for the day of the battle, to rescue him from the enemies who oppose him, and to deliver him from the current troubles. Verse 3, they pray that God will remember all thy offerings, that's David's offerings, and accept thy burnt sacrifice. As I've already said, on the day of the battle it was the custom of the priests to offer an animal in prayer for the soldiers as they went into battle, and for David as the king of Israel. And just that animal was burnt whole upon the altar, and its smoke rose up to God. That was a picture of how God would receive the prayers of the people in that situation. And with the sacrifice, other gifts would be offered too. We have a reference to them here in the offerings. Grain would be offered and oil. And if God remembers these offerings, if God remembers these gifts, these sacrifices, then God will remember the people and remember them in the day of battle. Remember to defend them and to look after them and help them. And with the thought of the sacrifice and the importance of that sacrifice, the word here appears, selah, a little pause in the music, a little pause in the worship, to reflect on what we've just prayed and just said, and then the requests will continue. In verse 4, when the people or the priests pray for David, that God will grant thee according to thine own heart, and fulfill all thy counsel. So they're praying that God will grant David according to David's own heart. David's own heart, what David truly desires. They're praying that God will grant or give David what he truly desires. Now, if David was praying against the will of God, if he was praying for something that was wrong, then God wouldn't give that. It was so important that David's heart be matched with the heart attitudes of God, that David should want what God wanted. If David simply wanted his own wealth, his own importance, his own success, if it were greedy, selfish prayers that David was praying, then it would be quite wrong for the people to pray that God would give David those things. No, David had to desire what God wanted. And the people also pray that God will fulfill all David's counsel. Counsel really means wise advice, but in the Bible it often appears for the result of that advice, the plans. May God fulfill all your, David's, plans. May he fulfill them, may he completely carry out the plans that David has made. Not selfish plans, the right plans which are in accordance with God's will, which are what God desires. So the people have prayed these things for David, or the priests have prayed these things on behalf of the people for David. And then the people make a declaration in verse 5. We will rejoice in thy salvation, and in the name of our God we will set up our banners. We will rejoice in thy salvation. They promise the people that they are going to be joyful when they see David's salvation. Salvation means rescue and safety. They are confident that God is going to rescue David from the dangers of the battle, that God will bring David to a place of safety. And they promise that when they see that complete, they will rejoice. They will be glad in what God has done for David. And in the name of our God, we will set up our banners. Banners are flags. And Israel's people, as they marched into war, would boldly carry their banners. But the description here, connected to David's salvation in the first part of the verse, seems to refer not to going into battle, but rather to the victory processions afterwards, when the people would rejoice and again they would set up flags and banners to celebrate, not just to celebrate their victory in battle, not even mainly to celebrate their victory in battle, because in the name of our God we will set up our banners. They're celebrating what God had done for them, that God had rescued them from a fierce and terrible enemy. And they add the prayer, the Lord fulfill all thy petitions. May God carry out fully all the requests that David places before him. May God answer all of David's prayers. Some people think that verse 6 is a reply spoken maybe by a Levite who's seen the sacrifice, who's seen the smoke rise up to heaven and is confident and in faith that God has answered that prayer. But I see no reason why verse 6 should not be spoken by David himself. David had seen that sacrifice. David had seen the people's reaction to it, that they declared that they would rejoice in how God rescued David and how they would set up their banners in the name of God. And now David is confident. He's confident about this battle which he hasn't fought yet, because he has faith in God, belief and trust in the God who will save him, who saved him so often in the past and will save him yet again. Verse 6. Now know I that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. The Anointed. An ancient title for Israel's kings. It refers to the sacred ceremony when oil was poured on the head of the new king. You can read how Samuel anointed David when David was just a youngster to become the king of Israel. And the purpose of that ceremony, the oil going on the head, it was to signify how that person was being separated from other people by the power of the Holy Spirit to do their special work for God. Later on, the Anointed becomes the title of the Messiah, the Christ. Christ is nothing more than a translation into Greek of the Hebrew word which gives us Messiah, which is a word for anointing. David is God's anointed in this situation, and he was confident because he was in faith that God would rescue him from these troubles. And more, that he, God, will save him, the anointed, from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. The right hand, the hand that most people, it's their strongest hand. God is going to act in strength and in power to save or to rescue David. Why? Because God has heard David from his holy heaven. The word holy there, it's the same word in Hebrew as in verse 2 where we have the word sanctuary. In verse 2, it's referring to God sending help from his sanctuary, from his holy place on earth. But in verse 6, when it uses the same word translated holy, it's referring to God acting from his holy place in heaven, as the ruler of heaven and earth, acting in great power to rescue David from his troubles. And with that sort of protection, and with that sort of salvation, David had the confidence to trust in God alone. It was true that other armies were more powerful than Israel's army. That's why Israel for so many years had suffered from the oppression of its enemies. Why those enemies had chariots and they had horses. Horses were fast. They still are fast if you see a racehorse today. Chariots which horses pulled and which carried soldiers. These were modern military equipment. These were powerful vehicles in the time of David. We think of tanks and this sort of thing today. That's how David and his men thought of the horses and the chariots. Fierce, in battle, powerful. Israel's enemies had horses and chariots, but Israel, which for a long time lived only in the hill country, they had no chariots. Chariots were not even useful for them in the hills. They were afraid of the people in the chariots at the time of the book of Judges. But David was not afraid of the chariots and the horses. He wasn't afraid of armies with all their military strength who'd risen up to oppose him. Why? Verse 7. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Oh, we're not depending on horses or chariots or weapons of war. No, we remember the Lord our God, the God of heaven and earth, the God who created all things, who has all power. We remember his name, his character, his love for his people, his relationship with his people. And when we remember that, the horses and the chariots and the weapons of the enemy don't seem so strong at all. Because if God has all power, he can defeat the most powerful enemy and he can set us free from our troubles. Verse 8, they are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. Look closely at that word risen. We are risen. You can only rise up if you're in a low position. You can only rise up in strength if you've been in weakness. A person who is standing up cannot rise anymore. A person lying on the floor is the person who has to rise up. We are risen and stand upright. What it's saying is that Israel was in a weak position. Enemies had taken advantage of it and dealt cruelly with Israel's people. They were like someone lying on the floor, someone who'd fallen to the ground. But God gives them strength to rise up and to stand upright and to stand firm in the day of battle so that their enemies are defeated. And what happens to the enemy? The enemy that was so proud and so powerful, they are brought down and fallen. It's as if they have fallen to the ground in complete weakness because they are defeated and God has rescued his people once more from their troubles. Verse 9, the closing words. Save, Lord, let the King hear us when we call. Save, Lord, rescue us, O God. But what does this mean? Let the King hear us. Who is this King? A lot of people have thought that this King means God, that they're praying now for God to hear them when they pray. Well, yes, they are. They, of course, desire that God should hear them when they pray, but that would add nothing to the psalm, would it? What if the King means David? David himself. They're saying, we, the soldiers, called to David for help. That's why we're fighting this battle in the first place. We went to David and we said, this cruel enemy has been oppressing us for so long. Please raise up an army and lead them into battle to go and to defeat them. And David listened to their request. But could he hear them? Could he act on that request? Could he set them free from those troubles? That depended upon God and upon God's help and support for David. So what's happening in verse 9 is that the people are praying that David will be able to hear these requests they're putting before them. There'll be more requests as they fight this battle. They'll ask for reinforcements here and there. They'll ask for help from David. Can David hear these requests? Can he really answer what the people are calling on him to do? Only God can give him the strength to do these things. So the people pray before the battle, let David be able to hear us when we call, because you, God, are the one who saves. You are the one who has saved Israel in the past, and you are the one, the only one, who can save Israel in this great battle. Please write to me. My email address is 333kjv@gmail.com. My name again is Keith Simons. The email address again is 333kjv@gmail.com. Please tell me where in the world you are. If you're in the United States, please tell me which state. And it would be very interesting to know whether this is the first time you've heard these talks or whether you've listened to them perhaps many times before. So, in conclusion, let me read you the whole of Psalm 20. To the chief musician, a psalm of David. The Lord hear thee in the day of trouble. The name of the God of Jacob defend thee. Send thee help from the sanctuary, and strengthen thee out of Zion. Remember all thy offerings, and accept thy burnt sacrifice. Selah. Grant thee according to thine own heart, and fulfill all thy counsel. We will rejoice in thy salvation, and in the name of our God we will set up our banners. Lord, fulfill all thy petitions. Now know I that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some trust in chariots, and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. Save, Lord, let the King hear us when we call.